In the 1992 Olympic Games in Barcelona, British track star Derek Redmond was set to medal in the 400-meter race until absolute tragedy happened. He tore his hamstring just 100 meters into the race. I mean, put yourself in his place for a moment. You have literally trained most of your life for this one moment, this one shot. You qualified for the Olympics just to have it snatched away like that. But you know what makes this story so popular and well known is not for the tragedy that happened, but for the incredible moment that took place out on the track field. His father, Jim, actually was able to get down on the track. He hopped the railing, he busted through security, and he got to his son as his son was lying there in agony and pain. And so Jim gets to his son, Derek, and he just gets his arm around him to continue to help him finish the race. I mean, isn't that just absolutely beautiful? And what's great is that it came out later that the first thing Jim said to him, to his son Derek, was you don't have to continue. You don't have to finish. I'm proud you made it this far. You don't have to continue. But Derek said, no, I have to. Help me. And they walked arm in arm to the finish. Based on his performance, Derek Redmond didn't win the 400-meter race. He didn't medal. He didn't earn it. But if you were to ask his father, Jim, if Derek won that day, he would say emphatically, absolutely. And seeing the imagery of it, we would say the same thing. Derek won so much more than what a performance in the Olympics 400-meter race could offer him. This is a powerful and a beautiful image of our relationship to God. God has given us grace at the start. We don't have to earn it. We don't have to fight for it. We don't have to keep score. To start the race, God has given us all of the grace. So that means no matter what happens in this life, no matter what happens in this race to you or me, where we finish or what happens out on the track, so to speak, no matter what happens, God is quick to give us grace. God is proud. And God will meet us out on that track, and He will help us finish strong.
Burn the boats, we're here. So listen, I hope that you have had a lot of fun with us the first couple of weeks. The first week we talked about how Jesus plus anything ruins everything, right? We don't add to the finished work of Jesus. It's Jesus, it's always Jesus, it's only Jesus, right? And then week 2, we had a treat. We had our Riverview campus pastor, Pastor DJ, come on. Man. That man almost brought that Holy Spirit fire onto my head. It was great. But Pastor DJ talked about how the gospel is not about behavior modification, but about life transformation. Gosh, and now I gotta follow that. Thanks, by the way. So we are in the book of Galatians. We covered the first 2 chapters in these first couple of weeks. Well, we are going to jump into Galatians 3 today, and I hope you are excited. We're going to talk about one word, and you are going to be sick of hearing me say this word so much. The word is simple. The word is grace. It's grace. I'm a personal addict of it. I need all that I can get of grace. Listen, that is what today is all about, and I'm actually going to use this bookshelf right here to help prove this point, specifically these bookends right here, to prove that this idea of grace is so necessary and that we need it. But before we kind of get into all of this, I want to ask you a question. Have you ever, think for just a moment, have you ever been forgiven? All right. All the Christians in the room are like, oh, praise God, right. So you've been forgiven, right? You said something so stupid that it shocked you how stupid it was as it came out, and you begged for forgiveness, and the person actually forgave you, right? Listen, it's one of the most beautiful things to hear that someone forgives you. A dear friend of mine down in Kentucky, he's there we go Cats. He was in his first relationship ever, and he was devastated with some heartbreak. They broke up and everything, and I kind of reached out. Hey man, you know how Christians do, praying for you. Can't say I really was, but I reached out to him and I wanted him to know, like, bro, I want to be there for you, but I can't, you know. And a few days went by before I really checked in on him again, before I felt like I had time. You know, we're slaves to busy, but just busy doesn't mean that you're actually making a difference in your life. So I'm all been out of shit with busy, but I finally reached out to him and I'm like, hey man, I just figured you had a lot of help. You had a lot of people in your life, you know, there to support you. And he said, no, actually, I have none of that. And I feel really like you forgot about me. And I said, I'm so sorry. My motives weren't evil, right? It's not like I purposely tried to hurt him. It's just I assumed, right? And that was still wrong. I still had to own that. I still had to say, you know, I'm so sorry. And he said 3 of the most beautiful words we could ever hear: I forgive you. And so grace reminds me of bookends. These bookends right here. Grace reminds me of bookends because like bookends, grace supports some of the heaviest things we could ever walk through. For Christians, we should always start with grace and we should always finish with grace. And by that I mean any conflict that we have. But you know, Christians, we never have conflict with anybody, right? Thanksgiving's coming up. But whatever conflict we have, I'm telling you, bookend it with grace. Start with grace and finish with grace. And by that, I just simply mean, take a deep breath. Chill. Don't allow your mind to just go to the worst case scenario. No, take a deep breath. Think to yourself, I'm sure I misheard her. He's probably having a bad day. It's just a deep breath, and you just start with a little bit of grace. Start with grace. Believe the best in someone first. But then also finish with grace. And by that I mean, let it go. Don't live in the conflict, okay? Don't live in the drama, but forgive. Allow that person to grow and mature and move on, okay? And so this little interesting interaction came to mind as I'm thinking of grace and bookending things with grace and how Christians, we should be professional grace givers and how ultimately we're not great at it. We are human, okay? But we need to be. And so some years ago, I saw an incredible worship artist. I won't say who he is, but he hung around after the concert and he took pictures with me, and he took pictures with the group I was with. He was such a great guy. He was humble. He didn't just stop and talk. He actually made eye contact, you know? Like a lot of people, they look to the next person. They're ready to move on, you know? But he made me feel valuable. And I've always respected him for that. Well, a little while later, I had some other friends go to one of his concerts, and they came back with a very different report. And they said he blew them off. They said that he looked at them and rolled his eyes. Not that anyone would ever exaggerate, right, when you're mad. And they said, we'll never go to one of his shows ever again. I said, could it be, I don't know, maybe he had a bad day. Maybe he's absolutely exhausted. Maybe he's emotionally spent. I mean, he's an artist. He works hard. Why not give him grace? I mean, we have a bad day, right? Why can't other people have a bad day, right? And so Christians, we know what it feels like to be forgiven, to be given grace. So we should be the most forgiving and most gracious and most loving people that walk this earth. Are you with me? That's who we should be. And so I'm gonna make you so sick of the word grace today. I'm just gonna hit it home constantly, and you will never be able to look at bookends ever the same. Every time you look at a bookend, you'll think, I need to forgive someone. Sermon title is simple, okay? I told you I'm from Kentucky. I keep it simple, okay? Last week, a couple weeks ago, just Jesus plus, all right? This week, it is simply bookended grace. Bookended grace. So first thing, whether you are joining us on video or online or you are in the room with me, we all have relationships with people, right? Good or bad. We got parents, we have a spouse, we got friends, we got coworkers, we got kids that aren't our kids, but they're like our kids. You know, we got people we're sitting next to right now, people we wish we had a different relationship with we're sitting next to. I get it. We have relationships, okay? Good or bad, we have relationships. And so listen, we have a relationship with people. We also have a relationship with God. And Galatians 3, the Apostle Paul wants to make clear what that relationship with God is like. But before we jump into that passage in Galatians 3, I want to remind you of what's going on right here. Because remember, the book of Galatians is a letter the Apostle Paul wrote to the church in Galatia, right? What Paul would call a letter, we're calling a book, okay? And so Paul writes this letter. But why did he write the letter? It's because he planted this church, right? He started this church sometime earlier. He preached Jesus. He saw people come to Christ. He saw people turn their lives around. And then he went off to plant other churches. And he said, hey, you're in charge. Preach Jesus. Make disciples. But then Paul gets word later that some people had come in and that they were teaching things that weren't true of God, of Jesus. They were saying that Jesus is great, but you got to do more than just believe. And so Paul writes this letter. So we went Galatians 1, Galatians 2, and now we're in Galatians 3. So imagine Pastor Jeremy's on sabbatical, and he has a letter for Pastor DJ and I, and he wants to write to us. So like the Galatians are just as excited as we would be excited. I wonder what he's going to say. We would get up and just read it to you. So imagine you are a part of the church in Galatia, and you know, because they had scrolls, you know, you kind of like take your time with it, you unscroll it, and this is what Paul says, picking up Galatians 3, verse 1. Oh, foolish Galatians. Oh, shoot, I should have read this first before I just threw it your all's way. Paul asks, who has bewitched you? It was before your eyes that Jesus Christ was publicly portrayed as crucified. Paul is saying, I preached Jesus to you. What happens? Verse 2, he says, let me ask you only this. Did you receive the Spirit by works? By works of the law or by hearing with faith? Listen, verse 2 is huge. And this is kind of where we will remain for the rest of our time together. But listen, Paul is asking in verse 2, he's asking a rhetorical question, but he's making a powerful point, okay? You received the Spirit by faith, not work, not by doing, not by holding up your end of the bargain. You received faith by God's grace. It's that simple. And so hear this, church. Hear this, Metro. You have a grace-based relationship with God. You do not have a works-based relationship with God. And so here's what that means. There's nothing you could do right to earn God's grace. God's grace is just a given. It is constant. It is unending. Some people think they have to clean themselves up before they come to God. That is not true. Show up in your Guns N' Roses shirt. Raise your hands in worship. Keep them in your pocket. Who cares? Drink coffee. We don't mind. Just come as you are. You are welcome here. We want you here at Metro, do we not? I wore a sweater because I thought I wouldn't be preaching, and here I am preaching. By the way, there's nothing you can do to lose God's grace. So there's nothing you can do to actually earn it. There's nothing you can do to actually lose it. God's grace is always offered to anyone. No amount of good deeds, of work, will get you into heaven. There are no cosmic-sized scales weighing your good and your bad deeds. That's karma. That's a very popular cultural philosophy, but it's not a biblical one, okay? That doesn't exist. And so listen, God's grace is constant. If my oldest son, Locke, which we get some flack for, and I'm like, come on, it's a century-old name. We're not those kind of parents. But anyway, if my oldest son, Locke, mouths off to his mama, which he would never do, and maybe he rolls his eyes at dad and he slams the door, he would never do anything like that. But then he finds dad's screwdriver and he's alone and there's a big, beautiful painted wall. And he just thinks, I want to be an artist. That last part actually didn't happen. But what if he tried to do his best Michelangelo impression on my wall? I would still love him, right? I'd have some righteous, tough love to give out, but my love for him is constant, right? And that's how God sees us. I love all of my kids, Locke and Theodore and Linya. God bless. I'm a dad to a little girl. My heart is 1,000 pieces constantly. But my love for them is constant and always is there. It's always present. Your relationship with God, the grace that he gives to you, it is constant. His forgiveness is constant. That is beautiful, and that is the gospel. And so today we're going to focus on this idea of grace-based relationships versus works-based relationships, specifically how we relate to God. Because the way you believe God treats you is the way that you will treat others. How you think God views you is how you view other people. And so if you don't have a proper understanding of God, then it will affect and it will infect all of your relationships. Now, listen, I said earlier, we all have relationships with people, right? Good or bad. But listen, those relationships are based on grace or work. And as I was preparing for this weekend, I was thinking about positive relationships I have in my life. And I only came up with one positive works-based relationship that I have in my life. All the rest are negative. The one positive works-based relationship that I have is with the weights at the gym. Because the more time I spend with them, the better off I am, right? But really, every other relationship that I have should be saturated, should be absolutely full of grace. Give grace. And we have relationships with people that are based on work. They're based on performance. And we have relationships with people that are unending. And we just give grace, right? It's simple. But listen, we all have conflict. We all have tension. So what do we do with it? We bookend it with grace. We start with grace. We have it out. We butt heads. We make peace. And we end in grace. We finish with grace. And so I want to ask you, the relationships you have in your life, the relationships you have with other people, are they based on grace? Do you just love them no matter what? Or are they based on performance, on what you can get out of them? Or do you feel like maybe you're on the other end of that? It's all about what you can give them. And so it's all about grace. Paul is trying to really drive this point home. Our relationship with God is based on what? Grace. Grace. It's based on grace. And so let's jump back into this passage from Galatians. We read the first two verses. Let's go to verse 3. Paul continues. Are you so foolish? Man, Paul's going in. Having begun by the Spirit, are you now being perfected by the flesh? Did you suffer so many things in vain? If indeed it was in vain, does he who supplies the Spirit to you and works miracles among you do so by works of the law or by hearing with faith? If you've got a physical Bible with you and you got a pen, circle verse 6. Just go ahead and circle verse 6. If you have it on your app, highlight it, do whatever you got to do. Verse 6 is key. Just as Abraham believed God, it was counted to him as righteousness. We'll come back to verse 6 in just a little bit. But remember, here is what's happening. These wolves, let's call these false teachers in the church in Galatia wolves, because that's actually biblically appropriate in this case. These wolves come in and they're all about the law, all about how things used to be. They're all about works-based faith. And see, when you do that and you make your relationship with God all about you and how well you think you're doing, you're no longer looking at Jesus and his finished work, but you're looking at yourself and your performance. You're no longer excited about what Jesus did in your life, but you're disappointed in what you haven't done with your life. That's wrong. It's Jesus. It's Jesus. It's not about what you look like, but it's about the grace that you've been given and the grace that then you give to others. One of my favorite authors is Bob Goff. If you don't know Bob Goff, you need to know Bob Goff. Pick up some of his book, Google him, he's great. One of my favorite authors. He said in his book, Everybody Always, he put it this way. Jesus said we should identify ourselves simply by how we love people. It's tempting to think there's more to it, but there's not. Love isn't something we fall into. Love is someone we become. That is grace, and that is amazing. That's it, right there. And so in Galatians, Paul is saying, it is by grace you have been saved. And so for us today at Metro City Church, we need to understand that by grace we are also saved, but by grace we live with one another. And so while we're not going to jump into the rest of Galatians 3, I want you to know what else is happening because we're only going to go through these first 6 verses. So verses 7 to 14, Paul uses Old Testament references. The fact that where they were at that time, he knew they would understand these. So he's making all these references, even in the Old Testament, and said, even back then, it's all about grace. And then verses 15 to 29, Paul dives deep into Old Testament theology to show it's all about grace, and it's always been grace, not about works. And so Metro, what I want to tell you is that if it's all about grace, then we need to be people who are all about grace. It's simple. I told you I'm from Kentucky. I like it simple. The Bible is simple. It's all about grace. So Paul uses these verses to paint a huge picture, and here it is. Ready? So in the Old Testament, what we would call the Old Testament, there were a lot of laws, right? Lots of commands of how to live a righteous life. There were 613 of those commands and laws. Like, that's pretty daunting, right? Paul is saying you live by all 613 or by none of them. You live by grace. And you thought your job description was extensive. Go on, 613. They even told men how to trim their beards. Like, that's nuts, right? That's crazy. But Paul is saying you keep all of it or you keep none of it. Paul is saying keep them all or keep none of them. In a way, he's pointing out their own hypocrisy because it's impossible to keep all 613. You can't do it. And so Paul is trying to illustrate that. And so in a very real way, I started thinking, what would that be like here today? And I thought it would be like trying to jump across the Detroit River to Canada, right? That's pretty crazy. But not swimming, just trying to jump, okay? I look around, I see some of you, you're pretty athletic. I think you could get like 10 or 12 feet, maybe 15 feet, but you would still fail the task because you didn't reach Canada, okay? What the religious people are doing, what they're saying is that they would jump, try to reach Canada, and on the way down, they would brag about going further than anyone else. You still failed. You didn't do it, but I went further. It's all about this false sense of piety. This that I have the truth and you do not. I can go further with it than you can. And listen, there's a difference. There's a difference in having good judgment and living in judgment. There's a world of difference. And there are so many well-meaning Christians who simply just live and condemn and judge and tear down constantly. This was not news to Jesus. He had plenty of interactions with people just like this. And actually, let's read one of these. In Mark chapter 3, some of you may be familiar, Jesus had some enemies. They were known as Pharisees, the overly religious that Paul was even talking about in Galatia a bit. So picking the story up, Mark chapter 3, it says, again, Jesus entered the synagogue, and a man was there with a withered hand. And they, the Pharisees, they watched Jesus to see whether he would heal on the Sabbath, so that they might accuse him. And he said to the man with the withered hand, come here. And he said to them, is it lawful on the Sabbath to do good or to do harm? To save life or to kill? But they were silent. And he looked around at them with anger, grieved at their hardness of heart, and said to the man, stretch out your hand. And he stretched it out, and his hand was restored. And the Pharisees immediately went out to plot how to destroy Jesus. They saw grace right in the face, and they missed the point. They saw it happen right before their eyes. And so here's why they care so much, just so you know. In the law, what we would mostly refer to as our Old Testament, it commands a Sabbath, a day of rest, which is good. And yes, Metro, you should have a Sabbath. You should have a day off. A Sabbath is a good thing. I have one. It's Friday. My kids are so excited every single week. They always look forward to Family Friday because my kids get dad all day long. My wife gets her husband all day long. I'm not on my phone. It's away. And sometimes when I'm on my phone, my wife just looks at me and I put it away, okay? We need a day off, okay? Find a rhythm, find a day off, find a personal Sabbath. But these Pharisees, these super religious people, they were twisting the goodness of the Sabbath. And they were forcing it onto others, that it had to be their way and no other way. So they're saying, this is unlawful, what you're doing. You're doing work on the Sabbath. And Jesus is like, are you kidding me? It's grace right here in front of you. This is a good work that God is doing. But they said it's not our way. Sure, it's a Sabbath. But do we do good or do we do harm? So church, hear me, please, please. It's all about grace. It's all about grace. It's all about grace. Because say this coming Friday, I take my kids to the park. Oh, it's my personal Sabbath. It's Family Friday. Oh, but there's a single mom over here. She has a flat tire. And she comes to me. And she says, sir, could you help? And I just say, oh, bless you, sister. Because that's how we're supposed to talk. Oh, peace be with you. But I'm sorry. It is my personal Sabbath. And I do no work. And I have to spend time with my kids who are both having a meltdown over here. I have to. It is in the law. No, how stupid is that? Come on, I'm a Christian every minute of the day. You don't get to turn that thing off. Grace, give grace. Compassion and mercy, these things are constant. These things should be coming out of us all the time. And so Jesus is saying, Jesus is demonstrating, give grace. That's it. Just give grace. And so I want to make this just a bit practical for us today, and I may get in a little bit of trouble, but we will see where this goes. We are going to talk about some works-based things and some grace-based things, okay? And the first thing we have up is marriage. Whether you are married or not, this is good for you to hear. A works-based marriage is toxic, it is difficult, and it's selfish. No, listen. Marriage is not a stroll through the park, okay? Marriage is also not Jurassic Park. Like my wife and I, the first year we got married, we got some terrible advice. You remember at dinner that one night, those people were like, marriage is so hard. It is the worst. You'll never like each other. We go months without doing anything. We don't even kiss, but it's worth it. Come on. Works-based marriage. Actually, Kelsey and I, we went back to Kentucky back in August or something. And the church that kind of launched us to come up here, they're a great church, incredible, I love them. they offered, or they asked if I would come preach and if Kelsey would come and lead worship for the whole weekend. They're celebrating their big 10-year birthday all weekend long. We're like, yes, let's go. And so it was great to go back and see old friends and to connect with people and everything. But this one couple approached my wife after I got done preaching. I wasn't over by her yet. And it was a couple that we had mentored. It was a couple that we did premarital counseling with. And we love them. They're great. And so they approached my wife and just kind of trying to remember how she phrased it to me about their interaction. She said, yeah, they came up to me. And like the first question was, hey, how do you think you did? Innocent enough, right? Hey, how do you think you did up there? And she said what she always says, like, he did great. It was his best one yet. And they're like, okay, but what do you really think about it? And she just was kind of like puzzled, you know. And she just basically said like the same thing. And they said, you're not gonna say anything like negative? You're not gonna say anything bad? And she's like, that's my husband, of course not. Why would I? And they said, wow, we're each other's biggest critics. We point at each other's flaws all the time. We pick each other apart constantly. That marriage won't last. That's unhealthy. And so I want to be careful because I do recognize that I just described some of your marriages in the room. And I need you to know two things. One, that's wrong. That's not a healthy place for a marriage to be. Your spouse should be your biggest encourager. And two, you can find healthy footing by giving grace and giving grace and giving grace. Yes, you're made of grace because you were saved by grace. So let's just give grace. Let's start with grace and let's end with grace. Let's have it out. I mean, let's really have it out at times, but let's finish with grace. It's all about grace. And so now let's kind of like move to grace-based marriage. I am always cautious when I hear someone say that their wedding day was the best day of their life. Because what are they saying? It's kind of been downhill since that wedding day. It's not been as exciting. Listen, I don't think that's what they want to say. I don't think that's what they mean to say, but that's what they say. My wedding day, to that point, it was the best day of my life. But I've had better days with my wife. I've had days that were a lot less exhausting, that's for sure. I've had days that were more relaxing. I've had days where we laughed even more. We had more joy. But maybe this has to do with my personal philosophy on soulmates. Personally, I don't believe that you find the one person you were meant to be with. I don't think that's logical. I don't see that reflected anywhere. It's just kind of one of those like Hollywood motifs that people just believe. I think you could marry anyone, but you chose your spouse. I chose her, she chose me. No, I don't believe soulmates are found. I think over time, soulmates are made. I mean, I loved her September 21st, 2013, but that was over 6 years ago. I love her even more now, if I'm being completely honest. Like she is my soulmate. There is no one else out there for me. But listen, we're not perfect. We ain't perfect, okay? We get a lot of things wrong. Okay, we have experienced a lot of heartache and pain. We have sinned against each other more times than I can count, if we're being honest. But we've also had some of the best moments of our lives. We've experienced plenty of laughter and joy and love and lots of love. And just 6 years. 6 years later, listen, she's my soulmate. There's no one else for me. And we hope to grow in our grace-based marriage. We want to grow in giving each other grace and love and mercy and compassion because she's my Chick-fil-A. So just a couple of things that we try to work really, really hard at, okay? We do a lot of marriage counseling, a lot of premarital marriage counseling. And so we always try to give these up for free. So hey, free advice, no matter if you've been married 6 months or 66 years. This is cool. Not that we always get this right, but these are just some guidelines that we try to stick to, okay? Never say never. Always avoid always. You never do this. You never say this. You always say that. You always act that way. That is unfair, it's untrue, and it's immature. That's just how it is. Never say never. Always avoid always. Makes sense, right? Perfect it's whatever. Let's move on. Something else we work very hard at, no interrupting. It's just a huge pet peeve. Because when you interrupt, you're telling the person, I don't care what you think. I care more about winning the argument than I do you being and feeling heard. I don't view you as the love of my life. I view you as an object or just an argument, and I'm a win. That's wrong. Right. Oh, but Pastor, she goes on for 35 minutes. It's okay, she'll take a breath. It's all right. It's okay, all right? Chill out. When we apologize, which is often, when we apologize to one another, we don't say what like everyone always says. It's okay. No, no. You just argued about something worthy of your anger and emotion and pain. Why are you now saying it's okay? Words matter. We don't say it's okay. We treat it like a curse word. The phrase it's okay does not come out of our mouths. We say, I forgive you. I forgive you. Because if she wrongs me, and we're walking through it, we're walking through it, but then comes the time for grace. I don't say it's okay. We work through a lot of stuff. That's not okay. But when I say I forgive you, I do two things. I release her of the burden, and I'm telling her I'm never, ever, ever bringing this up ever again. I'm choosing to forget about this because a grace-based marriage has a terrible memory. You did this 5 years ago. I thought you forgave me. Doesn't happen. We say, I forgive you. Marriage isn't 50-50. I did my half. No, that's not how it works. It's not how it works. It's goofy, but this is what I think great advice, but honestly, great marriage advice too. The next time you have bacon and eggs, remember, the chicken was involved, but the pig was committed. Be like a pig. Don't be like a chicken, which is always good advice. Be all in. Be all in, church. Come on, if you are married today, grab your person's hand if they're with you. Grab their hand and say, I'm a pig. I'm a pig. I'm a pig, baby. I ain't no chicken. My wife didn't marry a chicken. I'm holding hands with you in a way over here, okay? Hey, I could go on and on about marriage, but let's move forward. Again, whether you're a parent or not, I think this is practical, and I think it can be good. So let's talk about works-based parenting. A lot of us, unfortunately, know this to be true. We pulled straight A's every single semester, but we didn't do too hot on one assignment, on one test. It dropped us to an A- overall in the class, maybe even a B+. So what was talked about that night at dinner? That's works-based. It's performance-based. Parents, give grace. It is a talking point, but it's not the hill to die on. Give grace. Back when I was a youth pastor, I was talking with a dad whose daughter had went off to college, and they thought they did everything they could to instill their values, and she kind of went crazy, like some kids do, and she started partying and doing all that stuff. And again, he said, she was raised with morals. And I knew them, and I knew, she was homeschooled. They did what they felt was best. But what I gathered was that they had a works-based relationship with her, not a grace-based relationship with her. She could win and own you in Bible trivia. She had the book of Titus memorized. She jumped through all the theological hoops her parents ever wanted out of her, but her relationship with them was not based on grace. She was prescribed religion. Parents, give grace. Give grace. Speaking of grace-based parenting, go stage hands, go ahead and bring out, I need a little help making this next point. So allow me to kind of do a little deep dive into a story very quickly. So it is spring of this year, and I am out here at the Taylor campus. I'm outside, I'm noticing there's just a lot of garbage. There's a lot of trash around, and so I grab a bag and some gloves, and I start picking up litter. And I just start picking stuff up. And we had an event here that night, and so some people noticed. And praise God, we got some great people here at Metro. They got bags, they got gloves, and they came out with me, and we just started picking up the whole lot, and it was just incredible. It blew me away to see that. But you know, by the 8th or 9th Tim Hortons cup, I was really kind of over it, if I'm being honest. I was trying to give you all grace, like, okay, the Home Depot, we got the interstate, but come on, I'm finding so many baby wipes, I'm finding so many little flyers, I'm finding all these things. And so I started like getting into my head, like I'm getting so frustrated. If I saw someone drop something in a parking lot, I'd give it back to them, which I have done before, because I'm tired of seeing that. I'm not a tree hugger, but come on, let's be good stewards. I care about creation, okay? Let's have sense for a moment. And so I'm picking up all this litter, and I'm arguing with some of you in my head, like if I ever saw them, I know who would do this. I know it. If I ever got my hands on somebody who I saw could do this, I'd be at them, you know? And so again, we have a team of people out there cleaning up. And I was just thinking like, man, I just wish I could interact with someone who I saw this or I could prove it was theirs. And then like the heavens opened up and I got my opportunity because a little girl who was helping us, little Amelia, I hear her saying like, Pastor Kevin, and I look and she's carrying a giant piece of yellow paper, bigger than her. She's like 9 or 10, and it's bigger than her. And she's like, look at this giant piece of litter I found. And I was like, great. Like, I mean, I'm glad we're picking it up, but like, this is okay. And she says, there's a name on it. And I said, there's a name on it. I'm ready to stuff this in someone's car. I'm gonna put it on their windshield. And I'm gonna let them know Pastor Kevin did not appreciate this. But then I thought, wait, I'm a preacher. It's a matter of time until it fits nicely into a sermon. And then I can just bring it out on stage. So I held on to that piece of litter. And I've kept it in the back seat of my car for a moment just as this. And I just need you to know, the moment that I saw this, my jaw hit the floor. I was open. I couldn't believe what was in front of me. Anyway, I was just so mad. And I was shocked when I saw this. I was shocked. Blown away is another word I would use. And in this moment, I couldn't believe my eyes. I thought, surely there's another lock in Downriver, Michigan. They got a size right and everything. I mean, his legs are, we won't talk about that. Took a deep breath. And I thought, grace. I'm out here arguing with people I have no business arguing with in my head like we do. And I thought, grace. Parents give grace. Speaking of grace, last little thing, and we're gonna move on. I've heard this phrase a few times, and it's a little troubling to my heart. I don't like hearing it. But I hear parents say, my kids are being so annoying. It really rubs me the wrong way. And I found out why. Because being annoyed has nothing to do with your kids and everything to do with you and your response to stress. If my kids are being annoying, it has more to do with my inability to lead them, my inability to be a good dad, my inability to actually make a difference in their life, and it actually has nothing to do with them acting out. Parents, stop saying that your kids are annoying. They're not annoying. You just aren't dealing with your stuff. Your kids can bother you, and boy, do they bother you. But let's stop picking up stones and throwing those at our kids. They're not annoying. Listen, I got to wrap up here, but I wanted to talk about works-based community and grace-based community, but this is, like we've all experienced kind of negative interactions with people. We've had those. So I want to move straight to grace-based community, because some of the best advice I was given from my counselor was simply, Kevin, you need to stop complaining about difficult people. You need to love difficult people because you are a difficult person. I would know, I'm your counselor. Start with grace, end with grace. So who is grace for? Everybody. When should I give grace? Always. Great book. Everybody, always, give grace. So church, help me out. This isn't like a trick kind of thing I'm doing. Just say yes or no, okay? Is there grace for pastors? Is there grace for Christians? Is there grace for non-Christians? Is there grace for politicians? Is there grace for even that politician? You passed. Is there grace for your spouse? Is there grace for rappers? Kanye West's conversion has been a point of conversation for many people. So I just want to read you a quote he said last week. He said, "My job is to spread the gospel and let people know what Jesus has done for me. I've spread a lot of things. There was a time when I was letting you know what high fashion had done for me. I was letting you know what Hennessy had done for me. But now I'm letting you know what Jesus has done for me, because I'm no longer a slave. I'm a son of God. I am free." But is he really a Christian? Should we trust this? Christians in the room. Christians watching online. I mean this with all the love and all the grace that I can start this conversation with. Who are you to question that? He's lived a crazy life on a public platform. What would people say about me? If they knew who I was, if they knew the things that I did before I knew Christ, well, what would we say about you? If you lived on the public platform and everyone with a mouth could tear you apart. Local theologian and scholar Mike Hochberg put it pretty well. He was asked about his thoughts on Kanye. He said, "Man, you know how he is, man. I am more worried about the log in my eye to worry about someone else's speck." So, listen. Grace. It's grace, y'all, it's grace. Listen to me. If grace isn't for all of us, then grace isn't for any of us. It's grace. We bookend it with grace. We give grace. Let's give grace and let's have that hard conversation. But then let's finish with grace. Let's give grace and expect the best in someone. And maybe the worst was true, but you still gave them grace. Undeserved grace. And so listen, we started in Galatians 3, and I told you we would go through those 6 verses. Let's go back to verse 6. Let's end right here. Verse 6 simply says, just as Abraham believed. Just as Abraham believed. Abraham, the towering figure in Judaism and Christianity. Abraham, it says, believed. And if you don't today, I want you to know that it's about God's grace, and all that's required of you is belief. Belief in God, belief in Jesus, that Jesus died for you, and now it's time for you to make that decision for yourself, because many of us, we grew up in church, and we say, well, I grew up in a Christian home. You can say like I went to church all my life, but listen, you cannot inherit your faith. God does not have grandchildren. God has children. So it's a decision that you make, Not someone so long ago who christened you or baptized you, but it's a decision that you make right here, right now. It's time for you to own your faith because the Bible says Abraham believed, and that's it. He believed, and that's all it requires. Where do I begin, Pastor? Believe. Believe, because God's grace is for you. His grace is upon you, and he wants to give that grace to you. All you have to do is reach out and take that grace.